It sounds a bit crazy, right? Looking backward 2,500 years to figure out how to run a modern, fast-paced boardroom. It feels like a total paradox. But welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to see how ancient philosophies might actually hold the exact blueprint we need to navigate today's wildly complex corporate world. Because as it turns out, the ancients had this incredible, profound grasp on strategy and human nature that we are desperately missing right now.
Let's be real. Modern leadership is kind of in a state of turmoil. We're seeing burnout everywhere and a real obsession with short-term greed. And the crazy thing is, with all our advanced tech and massive data analytics, we've somehow completely lost the human element of leadership, which really makes you wonder, could the ultimate fix for our modern crises actually be hiding in the distant past?
Okay, let's map out where we're going today. We'll start by looking at the modern leadership crisis. Then we'll dive into Sun Tzu's strategic playbook, unpack dharmic wisdom and duty, look at Kautilya's empirical strategy, and finally, bring it all together by integrating East and West. Let's get into it. Starting right off with Section 1, the modern leadership crisis. Let's set the stage.
If you look at workplaces today, there is just a massive, severe deficit of trust. We've all seen it. This aggressive, profit-at-all-cost mentality and these high-profile corporate scandals, they've created incredibly toxic environments. We're literally watching leaders cash out while their organizations collapse and seeing systems that actually reward aggression way more than empathy. And the fallout? Well, you get a workforce that is entirely burned out and a society that just fundamentally distrusts leadership as a whole.
So, to find a way out of this mess, let's move to Section 2, Sun Tzu's strategic playbook. We're talking about a Chinese military treatise written over 2,000 years ago.
Now, it is fascinating how directly military tactics translate to modern business. Take Sun Tzu's famous idea that all warfare is based on deception. Now, in a boardroom, you aren't literally tricking armies. It translates to ethical information control. Things like how you manage the narrative around a massive product launch, or how you handle a PR crisis. Or take his advice on using indirect approaches, striking where the enemy is weak. For Modern Company, that is basically the ultimate guide to bypassing totally saturated markets and dominating an underserved niche instead.
And then there's this brilliant quote, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." This perfectly, absolutely nails Sun Tzu's core principle of flexibility. Think about the companies that survive and actually thrive. They're the ones embracing this exact ancient mindset. They're rapidly pivoting when the market goes crazy, they're exploring new digital models, and they're taking unprecedented global chaos and turning it into a massive strategic opportunity.
Okay, moving on to Section 3. Let's pivot from military strategy to ancient Indian philosophy with dharmic wisdom and duty.
Now, you might hear dharma and think it's strictly a religious concept, but actually, in the boardroom, it is a highly practical, actionable framework. Found in ancient texts like the Vedas and Upanishads, Dharma is really about the sustaining order of the cosmos. In a business context, applying Dharma means entirely shifting your focus away from just squeezing out shareholder value. Instead, it completely reframes leadership as a fundamental duty to keep society and nature in balance.
The ancient texts actually outline 10 distinct lessons for dharmic leadership, but let's zero in on how 3 of them translate so perfectly to managing a modern team. First, there's ahimsa, or nonviolence. In the corporate world, this literally means rooting out toxic culture, stopping polarizing rhetoric, and ending destructive decision-making. Then you have seva, or service, which is essentially servant leadership, prioritizing the empowerment of your team way above your own personal ambition. And finally, karuna, or compassion. This is your ultimate tool for restoring dignity in a workplace that, let's be honest, far too often just writes off employee exhaustion as mere inefficiency.
So the big takeaway here is that true duty calls for long-term responsibility over chasing some short-term glory. This quote from the Bhagavad Gita is like the perfect antidote to our modern obsession with immediate quarter-by-quarter gains. It's telling leaders, hey, focus on your core responsibilities and sustainable growth, even if it means you have to sacrifice a quick, flashy win.
But, you might be thinking, is this all just nice-sounding philosophy? Let's find out in Section 4, Kautilya's empirical strategy.
This is where things get really cool. Researchers recently used a structural equation model, basically complex statistical modeling, to empirically test the 4th century BCE principles of Kautilya's Arthashastra. They tested this on real, modern Indian businesses today. Kautilya was this legendary master of statecraft, and the researchers essentially asked, do his ancient rules for rulers actually predict success in modern corporate management, which is referred to here as upaya?
Take a look at this number, 0.684. That is the beta coefficient for Shakti, which translates to mastering financial prudence and resource allocation. Statistically speaking, that is an incredibly high predictive value for modern strategic success. It proves, with hard data, that Kautilya's ancient advice on maintaining a strict balance between income and expenditure is still, to this day, the absolute dominant predictor of whether a company can successfully execute its strategy.
But here's the catch. While things like resource mastery, self-development, and data-driven perceptions scored really high, the ethical principles, things like intellectual honesty, surprisingly lacked statistical significance in the study. The researchers noted that this exposes a really dangerous moral gap in how we currently do corporate strategy. It's a massive managerial wake-up call. Modern firms are absolutely crushing it when it comes to execution and data, but by ignoring Kautilya's ethical principles, they are seriously risking their long-term sustainability and the trust of their stakeholders.
So how did these holistic, ancient models stack up against the standard Western models we're so used to? Let's explore that in Section 5, Integrating East and West.
When we put them side by side, a clear picture emerges. The Eastern approach relies heavily on group harmony, macro-level stability, and subjective morality. It's a model deeply rooted in agricultural societies where human relations were everything. On the other hand, the Western approach, which was born out of maritime trade and the scientific revolution, thrives on objective rationality, super-clear legal systems, micro-level efficiency, and this concept of the economic man operating inside a well-oiled machine.
But neither system is perfect in a vacuum. The East can, unfortunately, stifle individualism and competition. It can create an egalitarianism that sometimes just blunts employee enthusiasm and kills innovation. But flip it around, and the West's extreme obsession with rational efficiency can completely ignore human emotion, and that leads to a hyper-self-centered culture where the collective harmony of a team is just thrown out the window for individual or short-term gains.
Which brings us to the ultimate organizational solution. The very best management model borrows the scientific precision and institutional rule of law from the West, and it actively tempers it with the deep, humanistic responsibility and moral harmony we find in ancient Eastern texts. It's really about merging that ruthless efficiency with genuine empathy. It's combining hard objective data with true intellectual honesty.
The blueprints for a healthier, far more sustainable corporate world, they're already written. From Sun Tzu's strategic adaptability to the profound dharmic call for compassionate duty, the answers have literally been sitting there for thousands of years. So, the only real question left for us to answer is this: will today's leaders actually have the humility to listen?